It's the big question right now in this country. When will Canadians go to the polls? I'm Mercedes Stevenson. The West Block starts now.
I, Mark Carney.
A newly minted Prime Minister and challenging the Conservatives in recent polls. Will the Liberals keep momentum and call an election soon? Our political panel gives us their take in less than a minute. And how do you navigate Donald Trump's constant tsunami of policy changes? John Bolton has some advice for Prime Minister Mark Carney and joins us coming up. Donald Trump has thrown a wrench into Canada's election race. Before the president's tariff threats, the Conservatives were expected to sail to an election victory. Now, for the first time in months, they're polling neck and neck with the Liberals. Trump isn't the only factor, of course, but he's casting a huge shadow over the impending election call. And the timing of that call is the other elephant in the room. Joining us now to talk about this is David Akin, our chief political correspondent here at Global News, and Bob Fife, Ottawa bureau chief for the Globe and Mail. Great to see you both.
Thanks for having us.
Well, quite the Sunday morning as we are here with a new prime minister, a new government, getting ready to go on his very first trip overseas. One of the first things Mark Carney did, the first big public thing, was to sign this declaration that looked kind of very Trump-like in a red folder, and he had the Sharpie and everything, killing the carbon tax. The Conservatives say the law is still on the books. This was just a PR stunt. Carbon tax still exists. Mark Carney says, no, it doesn't. I knocked it down to 0%. So, David?
Yeah.
Is the carbon tax gone?
Well, everybody's right, actually, here. Pierre Poilievre stood up on Friday at a press conference and held up the act. There was a bit of theater from Poilievre. This is still in effect, and yes, it is. But yes, what the Prime Minister did on Friday was set the rate at which you're collecting it to zero. And what we saw him do, it was good political theater on his part. How often have you been inside the Cabinet Committee room in all the years you've been here, Bob? Not very often,
No,
right?
once.
Yeah, so that's them bringing that in. He signs it to zero. That was a decision note, we're told, that then becomes an order in council and will be an order in council.
And that comes from cabinet. And
that comes from cabinet. So by regulation, you can set the rate at zero. But here's the thing, the legislation is still in effect, quite true. And that legislation includes paying money out in the form of the rebate part. And that, again, I got to hand it to the Liberals. That check's coming out 2 weeks into probably an election campaign we're going to have. And Doug Ford did something very similar in Ontario, handing out $200, what did he call them, affordability checks, just before the writ dropped there. Did it help? Oh, I didn't mind the $200, Bob. I don't know about you. Couldn't have hurt.
Memories of growing up in Alberta there with Ralph Klein, too. Lots of checks that are very popular. Bob, does this undercut the Conservatives, who say their main election plank is still going to be about the carbon tax? They say, look, we now just don't know what's going on with it. He's trying to be sneaky as they're trying to brand Mark Carney. Are they still going to be able to play that in the election, or are they kind of kneecapped here?
Well, I don't see how they can play it. I mean, the only reason why they had to go down to zero is because they would have had to call Parliament back to rescind the legislation. The consumer carbon tax is dead. Mr. Carney has taken it off the table for the Conservatives. They do have one point, though, that he hasn't been clear on the tax on industrial polluters. In fact, he says he will increase it, his government. And the Conservatives make a good point. Well, okay, our steel and aluminum industries are being hit with 25% tariffs from the United States on top of a carbon tax. That's not really helping their industry.
Right. I mean, it's pretty clear that I think we can all agree. Again, looking at the Ontario election, the key ballot issues that is going to turn this, affordability and Trump. And on affordability, Carney's move on Friday is aimed at affordability, but I absolutely agree with you, Bob. The industrial carbon price could play into an affordability. We will be demanding clarity from all parties on their carbon pricing, and I hope the parties provide that.
Lots of questions about Mark Carney's assets. We saw on Friday he got a little testy when he was asked about that. He says they've all been put into a blind trust. They talked to the ethics commissioner, but we may or may not see the ethics commissioner's report before the election is over and people go to the polls. David, what do you think Mark Carney needs to do to make that issue go away? Can he? Is he willing to do what it's going to take?
Well, I think there's two different answers to that. What he needs to do is just sit down, and he doesn't have to do it. Have a technical briefing, bring in reporters and say, here's what's in there. Because do I really think there's something nefarious going on? Carney, I mean, whatever you might think of him, does have a long record of public service. So are we going to find something out in there that he's trying to feather his nest? I doubt it. But make the issue go away. He's got some smart people advising him. Surely you know that on a campaign, you're going to get asked about this probably every day. You want to make it go away. Now, does he want to do that? No. He doesn't want to talk about
Well, what
that.
he doesn't tell us is how much he's worth.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the question here. Are you worth $10 million, $20 million, $50 million? We have no idea. Who is the person who's running the blind trust? Is it your brother? Is it, I mean, if you're having an independent person who's supposed to take care of the blind trust, that person should be independent and far removed from Mr. Carney's assets. We don't know who that is. Is he requiring to sell all the stocks, which apparently you're supposed to, but has he sold all the stocks and his investments in anything that may put him in a conflict with the government? Those are things that he needs to answer to Canadians. And, he doesn't want to answer those questions. And you said he was a little testy. He does not like tough questions from journalists. He's used to a more compliant financial press when he was a central banker, and they're very much respectful of them. Well, we're political reporters. We have an obligation to ask the tough questions. And that's something we're going to have to watch for during the campaign, is when he gets angry or annoyed or arrogant at journalists for pressing him on issues that he doesn't want to answer.
Well, and does that kind of risk putting him into the Pierre Poilievre camp, who people say they get uncomfortable with sometimes his tone? I mean, obviously they're very different personalities, but I'm wondering how you see that potentially playing out for Mark Carney on the campaign trail.
Well, I'm curious myself, because after the French debate, he was asked a tough question about Brookfield, whether he was there involved when Brookfield Asset Management moved to its headquarters in New York. So you got your facts wrong, buddy, basically is what he said. Well, no, reporter had it right. And then he had to backtrack and say, well, I was imprecise in my language. I was there when we moved the headquarters, but it's no big deal. It was to take advantage of New York stock indices. But we've seen this constantly with him, is that he's not used to being asked tough questions because he's being a central banker and everybody looks up to it. Well, now you're in the political trenches. I mean, Mr. Poilievre gets tough questions too, and he will fight back at journalists, and he has. But that's the nature of the game.
And I come back to those tough questions that Carney is getting. They're completely predictable. Any half-decent communications advisor will say, "Well, Mr. Carney, here's what. Let me look at the front pages of the Globe and Mail and what was on Global News last night, and you're going to get asked about this." And he has he has no answer. He has no good answer other than to be chippy about it. And I don't think that. I think there's a lot of upside to Carney. People are still getting to know who he is. Canadians are, and do they want the Conservatives to introduce Carney to Canadians, or does he want to do it himself, looking reasonable, I understand your concerns about conflict of interest, and I want to assure you, and here's when I first phoned around, and I'm sure you were too, Bob, first phoning around to the rebels in the fall, the Liberal rebels, many of them said to me, I would love Carney, but there's no way, because he will not want to do the financial striptease that he's going to be required to do. And they were absolutely right. He doesn't want to do that.
He has to figure out what to do next. Obviously, they're moving very quickly, and his government is sending messages that they are moving to the center, as we've discussed with the policies they're adopting, that it's a leaner, meaner government, smaller cabinet, focused on affordability, focused on a tariff war. Bob, I want to get into when you think the election will be momentarily, but what does Mark Carney need to do before he drops the writ?
Well, I think we've seen how he's moving the party to the center, which you've said, but it's the whole issue is how do you deal with Donald Trump? We got two signals from him on his news conference on Friday after the swearing in. One is he's trying to be less confrontational with President Trump. He's a business guy like me. He's been involved in real estate like me.
Last Sunday.
We're a big client of his. You got to treat clients with respect. I don't want to meet him right now. Of course, I don't blame him.
I mean, who wants to go to the
Oval Office and have this big towering guy, which Trump is, possibly making fun of him or trying to bully him, but he is sending a different message. And the second thing he said by appointing Philippe Champagne, Francois Philippe Champagne as finance minister, he's also sending a really important message to the business community, which had been very unhappy with this government and their spending. And I mean, every solution was a spending thing. Was that, you know, here's a guy who's a blue liberal, a businessman, you know, rest assured, we're moving the Liberal Party back. We're going to be more business oriented. We've got to change the economy here. We've got to get jobs created. We've got to focus on getting our products to international markets, particularly oil and gas, but to diversify. So I thought those were kind of important messages. It didn't go over with some people, though, because they didn't like the fact that it wasn't a gender-balanced cabinet, that diversity was not played up, or that, you know, there was not official.
That sends a message too, because that was Trudeau too woke. Right,
correct.
That's the woke agenda,
Departure
and that
this is
there's 11 women versus 13 men, and there is some racial diversity. First time we've had a cabinet in a long time without an Indigenous person. But again, I don't think that's not Carney's priority, and that may be to the good of the Liberals politically, though some people,
again,
the Democrats,
because Mr.
are all going
Poilievre
nuts
had
about
run
that.
against the wokeism of the government, right?
Undercutting that Conservative platform. We just have about a minute left, but I want to get both of your takes on this. A week from now, are we going to be seeing the writ drop? When's the election campaign?
I think it'll be next Sunday, and David's already packed, I'm told, and you are probably as well.
The go bag is ready?
Yeah, I think next Sunday. He could call it Saturday, but he's definitely not bringing the House back on the day after Sunday, March the 24th. My election date, if you do the math, we're not going to have one April 21st because that's Monday, Easter Monday.
Yeah.
I think April 28th is our
And it is
E-day.
going to be a horse race. The polls have them in a dead heat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something's up for grabs, and you wouldn't have said that 6 months ago.
Even 6 weeks ago, very different. Well, thank you both so much for your insights, and I'm sure we'll be talking all things election very soon, which political nerds like us love.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mercedes.